This is former leader Hu Jintao being swiftly removed from his seat last November. For the first time in a while, we saw what is going on behind the power struggles of the CCP. Welcome to China Insider. I'm David Zhang. The nature of communism and dictatorship is that they must eliminate all their political enemies. Chinese dictators purge their enemies. The communists struggle so that they can rule for life. It's a zero-sum game. Winner takes it all, and losers, well, they suffer a lot. Sometimes they have to pay with their lives. It's Game of Thrones. So let's start with Mao Zedong, the first chairman. Now, Mao had 4 successors, and they all suffered terrible ends. The most notable was 2 people that he had placed as successors. The first is Liu Shaoqi, former president of the PRC. Now, following the 3-year famine and the Great Leap Forward, that disastrous political movements that Mao had launched, he lost power. And the party in what's called the 7,000 people conference told Mao Zedong to step back. Of course, Mao Zedong retained leadership role in the Communist Party. Now, Liu Shaoqi was Mao's appointed successor. But Liu stopped following Mao's policies in the early 1960s, and then Mao got angry. He needed a way to gain control back. Basically, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution to reclaim his power, and that was primarily against Liu Shaoqi's faction, who are now at this point against Mao Zedong. Mao used his cult of personality and influence as the leader of the Chinese Communist Party to gather people of China. Now, with people rallied behind him, he usurped the throne and regained control. Liu was then publicly shamed in a struggle session, as you can see in this picture, and he was branded as an anti-revolutionary. At this point, we know about the Cultural Revolution. The second is Lin Biao, a famous war general that had fought alongside Mao Zedong and was pretty much loyal to Mao throughout the entirety of the Communist Party history. In 1971, he was branded a traitor for attempting a coup against Mao, and that was 5 years into the Cultural Revolution. Lin Biao, his wife In Chun, and son Lin Liguo flew on a plane to Soviet Russia in an attempt to escape. The plane would be shot down per orders from Beijing over Inner Mongolia. Now, with Deng Xiaoping, the second leader, Mao's trusted people all ended up suffering at the hands of Deng Xiaoping. And that was the case of the Gang of Four that was led by Zhang, who is Mao's wife. Now, Mao Zedong during the Cultural Revolution gave unprecedented power to the Gang of Four, forming the Cultural Revolution Task Force that managed the 10 years of bloodshed. Deng would launch a reversal and seek the crimes of the Gang of Four, and that, of course, was under the banner of rehabilitation of the terror from Mao Zedong. And Deng Xiaoping would also purge 2 more of Mao's successors. So you can see that for anybody to rule with absolute authority in China, they have to kill everyone, or at least sentence them to heavy prison sentences. Now, before we move on to more about Deng Xiaoping, I want to introduce our sponsor for today's video. Now, Blueberry Quality Product is a US-based shop selling some of the best beauty and healthcare products available. Specifically, I recommend this product. This is the Derma Roller, which is a German brand, and their Intensive Hyaluronic Acid Moisturizer Facial Mask. Now, I have very acne-prone skin, and it's a combination skin, so that means in the summertime, it gets quite oily around my T-zones, my nose area, and my forehead. And what this has done for me is I use it once a week. Afterwards, I feel and I notice that I get less oil, which means less breakout. And since I have to wear makeup, the skin gets quite dry afterwards when I take it off. So this has been very helpful for me to repair essentially my moisture barrier on my skin. Right now, if you click the link in the description using my code, you can get 15% off all products in the shop. And if you're in the United States, you can get free shipping after spending $70 or more. So check out Blueberry Quality Products, and of course, it will support me to continuing in creating contents for you guys on China. All right, back to Deng Xiaoping. Now, Deng Xiaoping, like Mao, would rule for life in a different form. Just like Mao Zedong, Deng would be stepping back from his paramount leadership role. But Deng Xiaoping maintained as the chair of the Central Military Commission, so he still controlled the military, holding his grip on power. Now, Deng's way of ruling was to set up what's called an advisory council that would directly involve elders of the CCP to make decisions. Deng Xiaoping would purge 2 of his own successors as well. The first is Hu Yaobang, the general secretary of the CCP back then. Now, Hu was known as a reformer who attempted to change the Communist Party for the better. But Hu Yaobang died of a heart attack during one of the work events, and it triggered what we now know as Tiananmen Square student massacre. And another was the premier Zhao Ziyang, who, because he refused to open fire on the students in the 1989 protest, he was removed from power by Deng Xiaoping and left to die. Now, the saying goes that the purge of Hu Yaobang was the end of justice in the CCP, and the purge of Zhao Ziyang was the end of moral restrictions of the party. And of course, the biggest beneficiary of the 1989 massacre was a man named Jiang Zemin. After Deng officially hands Jiang Zemin power, despite Deng's attempt to ban leaders from ruling for life, Jiang Zemin's grip on power would extend all the way until 2012. And we know that that's when Xi Jinping came into power. But there's one problem Zhang faced. Deng Xiaoping named another successor to take over after Jiang Zemin. And Hu Jintao, the man who we saw get carried out of the hall in the video, they were always in conflict. Now, Zhang was always in political struggle against Hu Jintao, but because they were both named by Deng Xiaoping, he couldn't easily just remove the guy, as this would cause a lot of delegitimization for Deng Xiaoping. Now, Hu Jintao, despite being the general secretary in 2002, he wouldn't have much say or control of power until 2005, when Jiang Zemin finally gave up his position as the chairman of the military. So Hu Jintao was pretty much useless in terms of establishing his own power. And his political rivalry with Zhang's faction would continue, and it reached a boiling point, again, Game of Thrones, when they were choosing the successors in 2012. Now, the Zhang faction put in Xi Jinping, whereas Hu Jintao's faction would put in Li Keqiang. Now, as you may know, Xi Jinping ended up being the general secretary, whereas Li Keqiang being the premier. But because Zhang had so much more influence, likewise he was trying to rule for life, Li Keqiang would become the premier, and Jiang Zemin would actually have, at the time at least, a little bit of the edge over Hu Jintao. Of course, we know now that all of it was out of the window when Xi Jinping launched the ongoing anti-corruption campaign. Now, the idea itself is not new, but it was the perfect tool to target the already corrupt CCP because, corruption and graft was rampant under Jiang Zemin. And Xi Jinping would later put essentially all the core members of Zhang's faction into prisons and essentially strip them of power, purging them from the top echelon of the CCP. Now, of course, Xi Jinping wanted to retain his power and control, and we're now seeing that in his first 10 years, he basically disposed of Zhang's influence in the CCP, and then later on, he moved on to dispose of Hu Jintao's faction. And as we saw, the pinnacle of that display of power for Xi Jinping was at the 20th Party Congress in November. We saw the removal of Hu Jintao, the former leader, by the orders of Xi Jinping. And that really shocked the world because for the first time in recent history, we got to see the darkness behind that curtain, right? That was covering it all up. And at the same time, we would also see that Xi Jinping is setting up his third term and as well as the fourth term in 2027. And this is going to continue. Whoever comes after Xi Jinping, if there is one, he is going to try to reverse all of those before him, including Xi's own influence. But as we speak now, Xi Jinping's anti-corruption campaign continues to purge his opponents in the military and in the party. And now there is no longer something called collective ruling. It is back to Mao Zedong's paramount leadership and Xi Jinping as the core. Of course, his circle consists of yes men who are his loyal subjects. But until when will they be branded as traitors, just like Mao, just like Deng before him? All right, this is it for today's episode on how Chinese leadership will purge their political enemies like Game of Thrones, but less bloodier, or maybe more bloodier. Depends on how you look at it. Anyways, if you enjoy the content, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, as well as share the story with your friends so that more can be aware of what's going on inside the CCP. I'm David Zhang, this is China Insider. We'll see you next time.